there in South Korea, people came up with words called social spoon class theory. There's no word saying social class, in our daily conversation, but people feel something about social class and classism issues, and they come up with this word spoon class theory. And in American European proverb, there is a proverb saying every person is not born with silver spoon in the mouth, and that's the cultural motif. And Korean developed their own words like gold spoon, silver spoon, copper spoon, and dirt spoon. Dirt spoon indicating that this person has no inherited social class privilege at all. And it also communicates a lot of sense of despair and frustration and anger about some social class issues that are present in society. So this is related to my direct experience as a Korean person who grew up in South Korea. Although in America we don't use word spoon class theory, I'm sure there are so many different ways that we actually communicate something about social class and classism. That was more like my personal background, and professionally, social class and classism is one of my research topics, and I received both clinical and research training around how we can talk about social class and classism in a meaningful way, in a more therapeutic way, because social class and classism sometimes, that conversation gets heated and a lot of, blaming and anger. Sometimes it's hard for us to talk about in a connecting and therapeutic way. Today's my goal today, this topic is not about whether social class is good or bad. Like, I am not interested in debating whether it's good or bad, but instead I want us to be able to talk about how therapists actually can effectively work with clients whose social class worldviews, which I'm going to talk about, those social class worldviews are being brought into the therapy room. How can you work and acknowledge and actually have a dialogue about social class issues? More specifically, I'm going to talk about what social class worldview means, and I'm going to talk about how these social class worldviews actually impact our experiences. And I want to introduce some vocabularies and also have some opportunity for us to think about our own cultural awareness and humility about very diverse social class experiences. I don't have a lot of certainty in my speaking, but there's one thing that I can surely say about social class. We just don't talk about it. And I'm curious, what it might be my observation. So if you have a different observation, you are more than welcome to share. But I'm curious why we don't talk about social class. I'm curious. Any ideas?
I think that whenever we talk about certain areas of privileges or means, that sometimes we feel really almost like embarrassed to talk about it, right? To name that. And what I see happen a lot, right, are people from different social classes, really saying, there's like this almost one-upping thing that can happen where someone might talk about a difficult time they had, and another person might say, well, yeah, but like I also had to experience this. And so I think it's just so loaded, and it's uncomfortable to admit when we have means to something that other people don't, because we like to, perpetuate this idea of we're all coming from equal footing, maybe.
Yeah. Thank you, Hillary. Yeah. I think we'll have all different reasons, and there might be some shared reasons too. But I think in this society, there might be some class differences, but we act as if this is classless society because class, again, has really loaded concept, and it evokes a lot of personal discomfort. Even therapists, noticing our own social class or client's background, we sometimes fear that we may miscommunicate our intent or offend or make our clients feel judged. And these are all the similar common experiences that therapists have reported. And it's very hard. It is true that it's been very hard to talk about. And ironically, social class is actually constantly part of our conversation. We just don't use the word social class. But where we spend money, the way we spend our leisure time, people we socialize, these all communicate our kind of social class related lifestyles and behaviors. So I want to read one therapy case vignette, very short. It may not be very short because I may read it very slowly, but I'm gonna read one case to kind of illustrate how social class is really be part of the therapy process. One of my clients was well-dressed, and I assumed affluent person. She was a graduate student who was about to complete her work in a prestigious program. Her presenting concern was about her troubled relationship and about arguments she was having with her boyfriend. What was odd to me was the level of sadness, despair almost, that she exhibited in session. My feeling was that her affect, her sadness, and sobbing were not proportional to her conflicts with her boyfriend. But each time I pressed her on what else was going on for her, she would say, I don't know. As a way to change the tone of one of the sessions, I asked her to talk about some happier moments in her life. My intention was to talk about other aspects of her relationship with her boyfriend. Instead of describing happier moments with her boyfriend, the first happy moment she described was about having breakfast at Denny's with her mother and younger brother. The client was about 8 or 9 years old in these memories. I knew that her mother had died a few years earlier, and the client still had expressed some mixed emotions about her passing. Interestingly, based on her response, I didn't realize that my question was vague and that she had interpreted it as any happy memory. Yet this memory was important because it was immediate, unfiltered, and seemingly unconnected to anything else we had talked about in counseling. I probed about her memories and feelings, and she would describe delight and warmness around these meals. Nothing seemed remarkable about the meals except the happy memories. What was the occasion that brought you to this breakfast? I inquired, seemingly innocuously. My client suddenly lurched forward, head almost to her knees, sobbing. After some time, I softly asked the question again. The client described the mornings before the breakfast when she and her mother and brother would drive around the expensive neighborhoods and pick out the houses they had hoped to live in one day. At the breakfast, they would sit around and talk about where they would live, how they would furnish the houses, and how they would all eventually afford these homes. The utter sadness was because her mother was not able to finally enjoy the home my client was now ready to buy for her. Her difficulties with her boyfriend were arguments that allowed her to avoid confronting her real issues. Her anger and frustration at her mother's passing and never living the affluent life that they had all dreamed about. So this case is from my former faculty members, his real case. I read this case because clients may not talk about, I'm here to talk about social class. Like social class is my presenting issue. Clients may talk about their experiences with social class in a diffuse way, but still really personally powerful way. So I wanted to share that case first. And now I want to invite you to share one piece of information that may suggest that your client may be struggling with something about social class and classism. There might be so many different layers of information, but just right now, think about one piece of information that make you think about, oh, there might be something about social class and classism. And I want to invite you to type in your response so that I can hear from all of you. If you're comfortable with typing as you listen. Do we have a chat box? Yes, we do. Yeah. I'm gonna read out a client who, when we were still in the office, often commented that she felt out of place in such a nice office space. Yes, yes. So clients are constantly gathering some cues and clues about what this space may mean in terms of social class. A college student who's in an elite university, she talks about feeling different on campus because she can't always afford to go out with her friends or wear the same nice clothes. Yeah. Clients saying college isn't comfortable. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Either we're thinking having to make difficult choices between different costs of living, for sure. Yeah. Expressing frustration and shame at having to ask her grandparents for money to cover her rent while she attended a prestigious college. Yeah. Winter activities that assist mental health care. Clients share he did not have much in way of wearing winter gear, including boots to keep his feet warm. Client continuously expressing guilt over her family's wealth. For conflicting feelings about money. Yeah. Client express persistent worry, anxiety about financing bills. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. A client whose financial status changing significantly due to divorce. And her ambivalence around this mattering to her. And procrastinating on buying a home due to past financial problems and growing up poor. Yeah. Wow. Like I'm so amazed by this variety of responses that include really diverse social class groups and also like how it shows up in a different ways. Yeah. We're gonna talk about some like conceptualizing tool to kind of make sense of these individual responses that you shared. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, Julie just shared that college student expresses pressure to make big impact on the world due to family wealth. Yeah. Shame not to afford a car, not being able to afford a car. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing this. Yeah, I'm gonna move to the next slide. See, before I talk about the conceptualization tool, I wanna mention three facts, so far what we know about social class in therapy. The first one is social class matters. There are so many ways to, support this claim, but one of the clear examples is clients from lower social class background have higher attrition and poor, more, negative, poor treatment outcome as compared to clients from middle or upper class background. The second fact is financial distress matters. Research shows that clients who are more financially distressed when entering counseling are more likely to drop out treatment after one session. So one session is sometimes the maximum that they can attend, whatever, reasons, time, financial stress, job situation, or potentially also fit, The third fact is therapist factors really matter. The risk of all the attrition is linked to clients' baseline financial stress, like intake at that point. But the strength between attrition and baseline financial distress varies depending on therapist. So what therapist actually is able to intervene and inquire and invite really matters in terms of serving clients who may not have the resource. Yeah, I'm gonna go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about social class. Since we're talking about social class, so you tell me what do you mean by social class? So we all know what we mean by that. So commonly we use this kind of class label, right? Working class, middle class, upper class, middle upper, upper lower middle class. We use this kind of label. We sometimes use these objective measures: income, how much you make, education, and occupation. These are really common indicators that we use. And sometimes we use some proxy measures, what kind of neighborhood you live in, leisure activities, access to healthcare, insurance, and how clients are able to come to office by taking a bus or personal vehicle. These all can indicate some sort of social class background. And sometimes clients just directly tell you, I grew up poor. My parents always had to worry about paying the bills. My mom doesn't want us to have the same life that she's having. There might be millions different example narratives, but I just wanted to give you some examples that sometimes clients tell you directly. These are very common ways for us to talk about social class, but what's missing here is that there's so much individual variability. Even somebody saying I'm, middle class, or another person saying middle class, their experience may be qualitatively so different, especially someone who feels like, oh, I'm a middle class in rural Maine, and that person may not feel the same sense of middle class membership if they're in New York, Manhattan City, So it's very subjective and context dependent. So sometimes it may, miss really important subjective experiences that client is really wanting and needing to communicate to you. So social class worldview model is not just like a category, but it's more like a worldview, a series of lenses through which one's social class and experiences and expectations are understood. And this social class worldview consists of one's beliefs, attitude, value, access to power, as well as access to material and social resources, and how we are socialized about how we can show our social class identity or not to show, or how we think about other people who may not be in the same social class group, and also experiences with classism that I will talk about in the next. These worldview impacts our behaviors and lifestyle considerations, how one spends our time and money. And also it impacts our relationship to our material object. Here, the worldview is a keyword. It's a kind of lens through which we see the world. And these lenses color, distort, magnify, and limit what is seen and what information is taken in by the individual. So it really highlights the holistic, comprehensive, and also really subjective nature of our being, how clients make sense of their experience. It helps us explain how social class has shaped our choices, opportunities, and relationships over our lifetime. It also helps us make sense of our own and others' economic situations and conditions. And it also helps us make sense of the way we perceive others, and more importantly, the way we see ourselves. The ultimate function of this social class worldview model is similar to, human, biology. We are always constantly striving to have some sort of homotheosis, and this worldview is providing some, mechanism so that we don't feel shattered or, conflicted all the time. It gives you some sense of, constant equilibrium. But when something happens that is not consistent with your worldview, social class worldview, then you may go through some psychological tension, discomfort, and pain as a result. I'm going to talk about classism because I think this may be a concept that has not been really well discussed in our training and therapy in particular. Classism means interpersonal prejudice and judgment based on one's social class that is expressed or perceived. There are four different types of classism, and the first form is downward classism. And when you hear the word classism, probably you will think this concept first, downward classism. People have prejudice or stereotypes against people who are perceived to be in a lower status class. And these individuals may report that. I'm going to read some of the actual quote. I have been treated poorly because I have been treated poorly by my healthcare professionals because I'm from a lower class. People assume I have bad communication skills because I'm from a lower social class. People assume I was abusing the system because I'm from a lower social class. So without knowing this person's full story, sometimes individuals experience this like unchecked judgment and assumption, and then sometimes behavior as well. The next classism is called upward classism. So prejudice and judgment toward people who are perceived to be in a higher perceived status. Yeah, I think some of the examples that you shared earlier on, since my family has a lot of wealth, they were worried how they're gonna be perceived by others. So I'm gonna read some examples. I have felt people were resentful toward me because I'm from a higher social class. People have called me spoiled because they perceived me to be from a higher social class. People have assumed I have my life figured out because I'm from a higher social class. Again, without knowing this person's full story and history and context, just because of the social class visible markers and indicators, these people experience some upward classism. The third form of classism is called lateral classism. It's a classism toward people who are perceived to be in a similar perceived status. Some examples, I have felt other people from my own social class group have achieved more than I have. I have felt I'm not good enough when I am around people from my own social class group. So there is some like pressure and inadequacy, try to keep up with expectations that their social class group members may have. The last form is internalized classism. Experiencing downward classism, upward classism, lateral classism, now it gets toward like oneself for not being able to maintain one's perceived status. So common example is, I feel pressured to act or appear in a certain way because of my social class. I feel worthless when I think about my social class. So I can give you some example, someone who grew up in poor upbringing, this person may have an enormous pressure to dress up when they go to, restaurant or, college, attending prestigious college. So they feel like they have to act in a certain way and appear in a certain way and feeling like they're not, meeting up the same, expectation. And someone who grew up in affluent environment as well, they may not want to experience upward classism, so they may choose what kind of, material they want to display and not to display because they're already thinking about this upward classism. And they may also think about lateral classism too. If I don't display these kind of items, I may get looked upon, I may not feel accepted by this. So it's very complex that individual can experience all of these types of different classism at the same time. Classism in general, especially downward classism, affects self-rated health problems and life satisfaction, mental health, so many different feelings. For instance, feelings of inferiority, inadequacy, humiliation. Classism also impacts academic and job performance negatively. And most importantly, as a therapist, as us as a therapist, downward classism affects negative attitude toward counseling. And here I want to pause and ask you, why do you think this is the case? Why downward classism make people have a negative attitude about counseling?
My first thought is just that I think there's a stereotype of therapy and counseling being something that's only for people of middle or upper class. And so there can be just a perceived barrier that like, oh, that's not for me, or like it must be so expensive.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yes, that's the first foremost reason. People who experience down classism, they feel like they don't belong to counseling. Seemingly, it feels like a very middle upper class space for them. So they already worrying about feeling ignored or minimized, and also feeling not good enough. And also, some of the middle class, upper class norms, the way we communicate, how we use our verbal skills and express our ideas, yeah, and literature talks about even the completing the paperwork. It may be just taken for granted, but it may not be the case depending on one's social class background and how office is decorated, what therapists wearing and what they are wearing. There's so many layers that they actually think about consciously and unconsciously, and pragmatically they may not be able to afford counseling fees, and that's huge barriers for them. Yeah, thank you for sharing your response there. I'm gonna move to the next slide. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about internalized classism, because I think that's what you're going to see a lot as a therapist. Internalized classism, there might be so many ways to define this, but usually it's feelings and negative thoughts one may have because one cannot fulfill the expectations of a new economic culture and environment. So living in, from high school to college, high school to prestigious college, that's a big social class transition. Like economic culture is changing there. Losing a job, or going through a divorce and losing some financial ability, that's a big social class transition. That is also new economic culture environment. Therapy, coming to a therapy, for those who do not feel familiar with therapy setting, that's a new economic culture and environment that they are entering. And it may involve a lot of symptoms or distress, depression, frustration, anxiety, avoidance, and demoralization, and so on. Yeah, one of you shared example about your client, and this is a direct quote from a first generation college student. And she mentioned this. Some people are like, I'm only going to hang out with people that are like me. They have money, they can do things like me. I'm not going to hang out with people that don't have money because they can't do things. So this person is referring to people who are perceived to be from a higher class, and these people feel like they are not included and not invited and not being able to participate in some social activities that their affluent peers are able to do. The next example is someone who is receiving support from Social Security disability insurance. She said, my therapist is so smart. He's just so smart. I'm a little jealous, I'll be honest. I know that he makes good money. They deserve it. They work hard to know and learn about each client that comes in. And he's got mega clients. There's some envy there. He'll go on a vacation and love to travel. I haven't been on vacation for about 8 years. So there's no like single emotion that person is articulating. However, there's something about some emotions that are being evoked by sitting and working with this therapist. Now I'm going to talk about this social class worldview model as a whole. So usually each person has some sort of like cultural capital. Aesthetically, how we decorate our space, what kind of items we choose, arts, and social capitals, what kind of social group we feel related or we want to belong and we get support from. And human capital, education, intelligence, your physical strength, all of these are human capitals. And based on this, we constantly hear some messages about it, from our parents, from teachers, from peers, about a certain social class and how a certain social class members should behave or should not behave. And sometimes we develop, most of the time, some awareness around social class, and sometimes people do not develop awareness, based on what kind of socialization they are exposed to. And based on this socialization and our awareness, now we perform our social class identity, what kind of materials we have, and what are some behaviors that are congruent with my social class identity, and what kind of lifestyles are congruent with my social class identity, or what I was taught to be. And these behaviors, materials, and lifestyle all impact our upward classism, lateral classism, downward classism. We perceive, but also we sometimes practice knowingly and unknowingly. And as an accumulation of these classism, some people, most of us, experience some degree of internalized classism. When there's no internalized classism experience, then it's all good. You are, just like peaceful homotheosis. So you don't need to really change your behavior. You don't really experience any distress. So you just keep this worldview going on, running. However, when there's an internalized classism, noticed, or, even not noticed, it's there. When there's internalized classism, now this person is going through some psychological disequilibrium. Something's not working here. So this person may change their material position. Oh, I need to buy this more so that I don't feel in a certain way. Or I need to have this stereotype about these people so that I don't feel bad about myself. Or changing lifestyle, like to cope with that internalized question. There are so many different ways, but the key idea is that when the worldview is not working currently, then they try to change in a certain components of this worldview model. So I'm going to talk about what we can do as a therapist. Okay, this model is making sense, but this is so complex, so what should I do? So I'm going to talk about this cultural, social capital, human capital part first. You could help your client identify and understand their economic culture. In a therapy setting, you could ask gently and with curiosity, tell me what kind of pressure you feel as you try to keep up with your friends. These responses may give you some ideas about what this person has tried to change or maintain their cultural, social, human capital, like through achieving more education or credential, buying more things. There may be so many different ways, but this may be good entry point for clients to talk about social class. The second part, I'm going to talk about socialization and social class and classism consciousness. How can we ask that question? You could ask, what would your parents and peers say about your current situation, to elicit, what they have socialized about where they are now, and what would your parents and peers help you resolve in your current situation, to see what kind of resource systems are available and how they were taught to cope with the situation. In what ways are you acting to leave out messages given to you by your parents or peers? Tell me about your peer group, your support network. So these will give you some ideas about what your client has internalized from social class messages. The third part here highlighted, material position, class congruent behavior, and lifestyle. I'm going to show you some example questions. Tell me how you imagine your life. How would you ideally be spending your time? What do you notice that others have that you may want or like to have? What do you notice about how other people act that you like? These kinds of questions can give you some ideas about potential discrepancy between their current situation and their desired lifestyles and material possessions and behaviors that lead to a certain emotional stress. Lastly, upward classism, lateral classism, downward classism, internalized classism. I'm going to show you some example. Sometimes you could ask, do you feel like people look down on you? Do you feel like you sometimes look down others who are not like you? What do your peers expect from you to maintain your status with them? And what does it feel like for you to when you can't keep up with your peers? And what do you do? And this will give you some ideas about clients' pervasive emotional and behavior pattern in responding to and coping with classism. And social class is present in the therapy room. Whether we want it or not, it's there. And it impacts our work with clients. And it's not always, a negative, experience. It can be very therapeutic, connecting experience. Some social class, when it gets acknowledged explicitly, and when therapy is willing to understand the complexity of clients' social class struggle and integrating into treatment, it usually impacts in a positive way. And it contributes to a positive client experiences. These clients feel safe, they feel like they can trust their therapies and therapy process, and leading to a positive treatment outcomes. And most importantly, therapeutic alliance, a sense of connection gets stronger by talking about social class. And social class in the therapy room also impacts in a different way too. It can have less positive therapist behaviors when therapists do not acknowledge anything about social class and social class related struggle and pain and history, and lack of understanding of complexity. Just checking, oh, middle class, done. So we use that label, but sometimes we miss the complexity of the meaning of what do you mean by being growing up as a middle class. And not really integrating a social class into the therapy. It contributes to less positive client experience, feeling judged, exacerbated power differential between therapists and clients, and feeling very disconnected from therapy process and from the therapist. And the only difference between this positive and less positive experience, it was some sort of like experiment that just one session fully dedicated to talking about meaningful conversation about social class, and sometimes outside therapy meeting, advocating for clients who need extra support surrounding employment, housing, connected to resources. Not that you have to do at least one meeting, but this is just one simple example, like one full, the meaningful conversation can change a lot. I want to pause here since I've been talking a lot, and I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts, reactions, and response and questions so far.
I guess I'm wondering, in a lot of the sort of prompts that you showed, they don't sort of name specifically that you're asking about class. And I wonder, is that just sort of a personal style thing, or is there kind of a reason why you may go about it using different language?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I could say both way. If you feel like using, I think talking about social class is important, talking about poverty, talking about wealth is important. We can be direct. But again, you know, how we are socialized outside the therapy, social class is such a just like taboo topic. So that's why this social class worldview model theorist, he developed these ways of approaching more like a gentle, inviting, more like a narrative based instead of you know, using a term social class, because social class can mean so many different ways. Yeah, so I think I could see both ways. Personally, I would prefer more like a storytelling, narrative-based questions so that clients can feel free just to share their memories and what they were told. Yeah, but I can also see the benefit of like being just direct, like, well, we need to talk about your wealth, you know, like, what do you think about, you know, that, you know, yeah. Right. I have one more slide. After that, maybe we can spend some time just sharing our thoughts and reflection. I hope I have one more slide. I'm afraid I have actually more than one. Let's see. I have more than one. Okay. Yeah. So social class in the therapy room, our self-awareness is really, really important. You know, we've been talking about social class as kind of out there, but we are human. We are people who also have our own social class worldview models. So I want us to be aware of our social class worldview model and how it may impact your work with your clients. You know, things that you were told, socialized, how you choose your material possessions, how you behave, and recognize and challenge your bias and assumptions around social class, and be intentional about some visible markers, you know, neighborhood, office decoration, outfit, and norms. You know, sometimes middle upper class groups have, you know, more values on punctuality that may not be the same value that our clients may hold. The keyword is intentional. I'm not saying that you have to disguise, eliminate your social class identity. Just be intentional, you know, how you would like to communicate and create a space. And be prepared to discuss this in a non-defensive, non-dismissive way. When your clients is comment about, oh, this office is so fancy and nice, you know, just be curious, you know, clients is invited to talk about if there's some meaning about that statement. Yeah, and social class difference in therapy. Since we have our own social class, you know, worldview, clients have their own social class worldview. Talk about some perceived social class differences with client. And sometimes clients may feel hesitant to start a conversation about it. So just invite and initiate conversation with your clients about some material concerns or other, you know, social class related concern, and welcome them, you know, bring these issues to the therapy. This topic is more than welcome for us to explore. And like the questions that we kind of just looked at, use some social class worldview based questions and inquire how your client may notice class differences between themselves and you as a therapist. And this is where you need to examine your own social class worldview thoughtfully so that you don't respond in a defensive or dismissive way. And when there are some breaks in communication or discomfort around the topic of social class, repair can ensue through recognition of the issue at a later point in life. So if you feel like you missed the time, it's totally okay. You can always revisit and repair the disconnection by talking about this topic. Okay, this is indeed my last slide. Yeah, so now I'm transitioning from like in therapy space to a little kind of macro issue. The keywords that I thought were flexibility and support and advocacy. There are many ways to look at social class issues in Maine, but one of the facts that we know is that more than 100,000 residents in Maine, that's roughly 8% of Mainers, were uninsured in 2018. And these individuals indeed encounter a lot of barriers to counseling, like the reasons that McKay mentioned, so some things that we can begin thinking about. We are not going to resolve this issue within this 10 minutes or so, but begin thinking about it. Find some ways to provide services during non-business hours, and active acknowledgements of the fact that class plays a tremendous role in determining who can miss work for therapy appointment and who cannot. Someone who do not have social class privilege will have a lot harder time missing their work because it may not be stable in terms of employment. And when client is communicating some material concern, financial concern, support your client in act of self-advocacy. Sometimes you may need to find more information for them and talk more about how they can advocate. And sometimes you, as an ally, stand with that process together. Something that Julie and I have begun talking and thinking about is involving some community community members in both developing and disseminating some clinical therapeutic needs and intervention. And in order for us to do that, we will need to work with some state, local associations to advocate for extending ways to reach clients who do not have access to counseling services because of their income level, lack of health insurance, and inadequate insurance coverage as well. I know this will not be the exclusive encompassing list, but these are some things that we can begin thinking about as a group of private practitioners. I'm gonna stop speaking here, and I'm gonna invite you to share any questions and respond.
I just want to say, as a therapist, how long have I been a therapist? Started my training 25 years ago. I think this is the first time I've ever had a focused training on social class, even though I would consider myself to be very well trained in multicultural counseling competencies. And I'm also just noticing, I really want to dig into this. I wish we had 2 hours to just talk about ourselves personally and what's coming up. And so just thank you for doing this, but it makes me aware of how much more of this we need, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. Since I have had the privilege of looking into this literature, but I also personally struggle a lot. I think I personally struggle. Did I overdress? Do I make my client, especially in community mental health service where I was in the past, I had to go through a lot of my own internalized classism. So I think it's very ongoing process for me. Yeah.
And that to me sort of speaks to the intersection. So for me, I think about that, especially when I was sort of younger or a trainee, about, the way you dress on one hand can sort of help to convey that you know what you're doing or help people take you more seriously. But on the other end, it may sort of convey other things, and just how these intersections of identity are really complicated around class.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially young age, being a woman, dress has a lot of, some social signal about, certainly. Yeah.
This reminds me, my husband, I think a year ago, had bought me this beautiful necklace. And I told him, I was like, you got to return this. I got to get something that's, not so sparkly and flashy, because I'm not going to be able to wear it to work. I would never be comfortable wearing this. And so now I feel a little validated in that, because he was telling me, what do you mean you can't enjoy it? Or, so it's just interesting, because I think that discomfort that we have, or that that extra layer that we have about how are people perceiving me, what are the different options. It's just so important. It can come up in so many different ways.
Thank you for sharing that example. And therapists are not the only people who feel that way. Clients also may feel that way. Some material, jewelry, certain thing may be very important, but they may feel afraid of bringing those items, or they may feel judged possessing those items in front of therapists. And be okay, just acknowledge, and we can talk about that in an open manner instead of dismissive, or like, oh, I don't see social class, we're not going to talk about it. That's how we act outside therapy most of the time.
I think I also appreciate you mentioning the idea of the lateral classism too, because I think that also makes some of the pressures, like the pressures can feel like they're coming from different directions too. So kind of in the sense of, within our space, I've experienced, I guess, people sort of feeling like, yes, this is the right space for me because it is nice enough, right? And kind of pulling a little bit maybe to know sort of, what is your class? Or I guess in the sense of, I don't know if that makes sense, but I think, kind of pressures come from kind of multiple angles in terms of class, and sort of who is the clientele for this practice, and am I part of that? And I think that affects people in different ways depending on their class identity. But.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for bringing this up or talking with us today. I just think this is like everything, like I could say my autobiography through classism, or it's just so all encompassing, I think. So I love having conversations about it, and with clients. And I think a lot with settings we're in, like I've been in community mental health, or I have taken main care as insurance with clients. So it just gives that broad range. So yeah, it's so important. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your response and feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add my thanks as well. And sort of similar to what Julie said, I've had a lot of training in sort of multiculturalism broadly, but it's funny how this idea of classism, I feel like it's such a, almost, I want to say sort of like a more applicable way almost to think about multiculturalism, especially because I feel like a lot of the trainings I've received have been very maybe reductionist, like, oh, like when you're working with this particular cultural group X, versus this is like, really, I think especially being a therapist in Maine, where we see a lot of white clients, where this is sort of this like maybe less kind of visible or spoken about part of their identity. They're not necessarily, like, as you were saying, you kind of have to actually elicit it sometimes from clients. They may or may not kind of explicitly bring it up, or may not be explicitly visible in other ways. And I'm just thinking through your talk, how many of my clients, maybe without my real awareness, have spoken about class in different ways. I'm thinking especially working with like narcissistic clients who are really into status and power and like fitting in with the right people. So yeah, this is just bringing up lots of kind of more like kind of broad case conceptualization thoughts for me. So yeah, I appreciate you kind of bringing in this other way to think about just cultural identity, really, and the difference between the therapists, particularly, and the kind of the power stuff that comes up there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that example. I can relate to that example a lot. Client needing to have status to cope with their experienced classism throughout their lifetime. I can relate to that example a lot.
Can I ask a question about the, I was curious about if the impacts of the downward classism and the upward classism are seen as similar, or if there is a difference given, there's obviously a power differential in comparing those. So sort of, I don't know, the impacts, I guess, of feeling like one's a target of downward classism versus feeling like one's a target of upward classism.
Yeah. I think until, this social class model was introduced, there was not much conversation about upper classism. So data are really limited so far. But my thought is that those who experience upper classism have some resource to cope with that experienced classism versus people who experience downward classism. On top of their experienced classism, they also have limited resource to cope with their internal experiences. So I guess that's why downward classism has a little bit more pronounced impact on mental health and physical health and attitude toward counseling. But I should say there is so much that can be uncovered about upper classism as well. Yeah, I didn't show you the reference list, and it's very text heavy, not my favorite, but when you watch this video later, and these are some good writing about these issues, class and classism.
Great.
Thank you, Yoon, so much. I hope we can find ways to continue our connection around this. So I know many of you have to go, but good to see everyone.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yoon.
Thank
you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
And us.
Thank
you. And just thank you for modeling vulnerability for all of us, because we all get really nervous. And that was amazing. And like I said, I wish we had more time to talk, but thank you. Really great.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed. And thank you for all the responses and questions. Yeah.
Good. Well, I hope you have a wonderful day and a great week. And I'll let you know when this is online. I'm sure so many people will benefit from it.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Take care. Bye-bye.